Hello and welcome to O-Level Biology. The topic is nutrition, and today we are looking at food. Food is any substance which can be digested and absorbed by the body to maintain the body's life processes. Of course, we know that the life processes are called metabolic processes. So any substance that you can take in and digest and absorb and then the body can use is called food. I want to ask, why is food required in the body? Or what is the function of food? Or the advantages of eating food? Yes, why do we eat food every day? Yes, food is required by organisms for the following purposes. One, for growth, so as to build new cells. Of course, we know that our bodies keep on growing, and because our cells are increasing, and that requires food. We need food for respiration to produce energy. We know that we have a lot of energy demands in our bodies, and it is food. There is food which is called energy giving food. We also need food for repair, especially for the worn out tissues and cells. When you get an injury, you realize after some time it heals and the tissues are repaired. So food performs that role. And then we need food for protection against disease. So we need vitamins and proteins. Well, that's great. That means we really need food in our bodies. We also want to look at the types of food nutrients in our bodies, or the nutrient compounds in the bodies. Who can tell me any type of food nutrients that we have in our bodies? Well, I can see most of you are getting it right. Yes, we have three major classes of food. We have the energy giving foods. Those include carbohydrates, fats, and oils. Those give us the energy. And then we have the body building food, the food that we use for growth and build up of body tissues and cells. That is the proteins. And then we have food that protects us from disease, or the food that boosts our immunity. We are talking about vitamins and the minerals. So those are the classes of food. There are three. We have the energy giving food, the body building food, and then the protective food. So we want to look at the types of food nutrients, or the type of nutrient compounds that we have in our bodies, or that we require. There are 6 of them. We have carbohydrates, what we call the energy giving foods. We have proteins, the body building foods. We have vitamins, we have mineral salts, refuges and water, and then fats and oils. Remember, the fats and oils are collectively called lipids. Fats are solid at room temperature, and then oils are liquid at room temperature. So we have 6 different nutrient compounds in our bodies: carbohydrates, proteins, vitamins, mineral salts, refuges and water, and then we have fats and oils, or lipids. Great. So we want to start looking at them one by one, and we are going to start with carbohydrates. Of course, we know that carbohydrates are called energy giving food. Who knows where we can get carbohydrates from? What do you need to eat to get carbohydrates? Well, I know you know many sources of carbohydrates, so we want to introduce carbohydrates. Carbohydrates are made up of carbon, the element called carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. You remember this in your senior 1 chemistry, the elements: carbon, hydrogen, and what? oxygen. That means they are organic compounds. Compounds that contain carbon and hydrogen are called organic what? Compounds. And majorly they exist as sugars in our bodies. They are grouped into three. There are three major categories of carbohydrates, and these ones include the monosaccharides. I want you to pronounce with me, monosaccharides. Then we have disaccharides. Altogether, disaccharides. And then we have polysaccharides. Everyone, polysaccharides. So we have three: monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides. So this classification or this categorization is dependent on the number of sugar units that exist in each compound. So we are going to look at them one by one, and we are going to start with the monosaccharides. So monosaccharides, of course, the word monosaccharide comes from two words there: mono, which means one, and then saccharide, which means sugar. So simply, it's a carbohydrate that involves one sugar molecule. Great. And they are very simple sugars. They're just made up of only one sugar molecules. So, knowing that they are made up of just one sugar molecule, what do you think are their characteristics? What do you think are the characteristics? And what do you think are the types of these monosaccharides? Do you know any? Great. Let's look at the properties of monosaccharides, or the characteristics. One, they have a sweet taste. Yeah, some of the things that we eat that have sweet taste might be containing monosaccharides. Then they dissolve in water. They are highly soluble in water. The moment you mix them with water, they just disappear in the water. And then they form crystals. When you feel them between your fingers, you feel some small solids that we shall call the crystals. And then they are capable of passing through a selectively permeable membrane. Just because they are very small molecules, so they can permeate, they can go through a semi-permeable membrane or a selectively permeable membrane. And then something interesting about them is that they can change the Benedict solution from blue to orange when boiled with the solution. That means they are called reducing sugars. Now, Benedict solution contains copper 2. It contains the copper 2 ion. So these monosaccharides are capable of reacting with the Benedict solution. In a way, they reduce the copper 2 ion, which is blue, to copper 1 ion, which is a bit brown or orange. So that's why the color changes from blue to brown or orange. Great. So we shall call them reducing sugars because they are capable of reducing a copper 2 ion to a copper 1 ion. So we now know why they are called reducing sugars. Great. So we have some examples here. They include glucose. I know you know the glucose very well. It's a common thing that you know. Then we also have fructose, which is majorly found in fruits. Then we have galactose, which is sometimes called the milk sugar. It's found in milk. So those are some of the examples of the monosaccharides. So we are going to proceed to another type of carbohydrates called the disaccharides. Now, if monosaccharides contains one sugar molecule, what do you think disaccharides are constituted of? Yes. So disaccharides comes from two words, di and then saccharide, where di means two. Di, two. Mono, one. Then di, two. Then saccharide means sugars. And these are carbohydrate molecules made up of two simple sugars, and these sugars are joined together. So when the two monosaccharide sugars combine, it results into loss of one molecule of water. And this reaction is called a condensation reaction. So usually when we combine two monosaccharide sugars, one and another one, when you combine them, a reaction takes place. And in this reaction, water is removed or water is lost. And a reaction that involves addition of two simple molecules with the loss of a water molecule. A reaction that involves a combination of two simple molecules to form one larger molecule with the loss of water molecule is called a condensation reaction. So for example, we have glucose molecule, which is a monosaccharide, plus another glucose molecule to form maltose and water. So that one is a condensation reaction. So we can see three examples there. Also, glucose combines with galactose. Glucose is a monosaccharide, galactose is another monosaccharide to give us lactose and water. Lactose is a disaccharide. Two monosaccharides combine to form one disaccharide. Then we have glucose and fructose to produce sucrose. Sucrose is another disaccharide from glucose and fructose, which are monosaccharides. So what do you see in the three reactions? You can see that water is formed in all of them. A disaccharide and water. So there are, that is what we call condensation reaction. And then the bond which is formed is called a glycosidic bond. When you add two monosaccharides to form a disaccharide, the bond that holds the two together in a disaccharide is called a glycosidic bond. Okay, you can look at the equation there, and then you can also rewrite for yourself and see whether you can manage to master it. Let's look at the properties of disaccharides. They are more of similar to those of monosaccharides, but I want you to be observant to see where the differences are. One, they are sweeter than monosaccharides. Yes, one of the examples is a disaccharide is the common sugar we use at home, the table sugar for making tea. You realize it is very sweet, and that's why we use it for making tea. And then they can be crystallized. They form crystals. If you have ever looked at sugar properly and you touch it, you'll feel some solid particles. Those are called crystals. So disaccharides can be crystallized. And then the other one is that they are soluble in water. Yes, when you add sugar into water, it will dissolve. And all the other disaccharides also behave in the same way. And then one unique thing with them is that they do not change the color of Benedict solution when you heat them with Benedict. They don't behave like the monosaccharides, apart from maltose. So it's only maltose among the disaccharides that is a reducing sugar. The rest are non-reducing sugars. They are not capable of reducing copper 2 from Benedict solution to copper 1. It cannot happen. They cannot do that, apart from maltose. And then they can be broken down into simple sugars by dilute mineral acids and enzymes. So these disaccharides, for example, sucrose, can be broken down into fructose and glucose when you use suitable enzymes or dilute mineral acids, for example, hydrochloric acid. When you use dilute hydrochloric acid, it can break down sucrose into fructose and glucose. It can also break down lactose into galactose and glucose. It can also break down maltose into two glucose molecules. Great. So what have we learned from here? We have learned that disaccharides are two sugar molecules, and we have seen the examples that exist and then how they are derived. And then we have also looked at the different properties of the disaccharides. So dear students, we are going to move to the third category of carbohydrates, and that is the polysaccharides. So we have looked at monosaccharides, we have also looked at disaccharides. So let's look at the polysaccharides. So from the word poly, which means many, and then saccharide, which means sugar. So these are many sugar units combined together, very many of them. So that means polysaccharides are much more complex than mono and disaccharides. Great. So let's look at their properties very fast here. One, they are not sweet. And an example of a polysaccharide is starch. And one of the sources of starch is cassava. So if you compare the taste of cassava and the taste of table sugar, which one is sweeter? Dear students, which one is sweeter? You realize that table sugar is sweet and cassava does not taste that sweet. Or maize. Maize also doesn't taste sweet because it has starch. So that's how polysaccharides taste. They are not sweet. And then they do not dissolve in water. That's why you are capable of making posho from maize flour. I'm imagining if posho was soluble, if that starch was soluble, then it would not form that solid posho that we eat, or cassava bread that we eat. So they are not soluble in what? In water. And then they cannot be crystallized. They don't form the crystals we talked about. And then they do not change the color of Benedict solution, meaning they are not reducing sugars as well. So the properties of polysaccharides include they are not sweet, they do not dissolve in water, they cannot be crystallized, and they cannot change the color of Benedict's what? Solution. Then examples include starch. I have already told you that starch is found in plants. It is a storage polysaccharide in plants. Then glycogen, which is a storage polysaccharide in animals. And then we have cellulose, which is also found in plants, especially in the cell walls of the plants. Then we have chitin, which is found in the cell walls of the fungi and also the exocuticles of the arthropods. So those are some of the examples of polysaccharides. So we want to look at the general functions of the carbohydrates. So after looking at the three different categories of carbohydrates, the monosaccharides, disaccharides, and polysaccharides, so let's look at the functions now of carbohydrates. So to begin with, they provide energy in the body when oxidized during respiration. They are therefore respiratory substrates. Well, remember that carbohydrates are sometimes called energy-giving food. So their major role or function is to provide what? Energy during respiration or after respiration has taken place. And then we have the act as food reserves, which are stored within the organisms. Many plants store starch and animals store glycogen. So these carbohydrates are storage reserves, food reserves in the body that can be used in the future. For example, glycogen can be broken down in the future in case the glucose is not enough in the body. Glycogen can be broken to provide glucose. Yes, and then we also have the important components of body structures. For example, cellulose is a component of cell walls in plants, and then chitin forms exoskeleton of the arthropods, like the insects. When you look at the skeleton of the insect, the exoskeleton, it's made up of chitin, and it is harder and usually repels water. And then we have heparin, which is the anticoagulant in mammalian blood. Heparin keeps our blood in liquid form when it is flowing through the blood vessels. It prevents clotting of blood within the blood vessels. So it's a very important compound there. It has a component of carbohydrates. And then they are important for commercial values as they provide raw materials for manufacture of various products, such as cellulose provides raw materials for manufacture of paper and textiles. So all the papers in the world, pulp and paper, are made from products from these carbohydrates, particularly. So whenever you use papers, you know that we are using carbohydrates, particularly cellulose. Great. So those are some of the functions of carbohydrates. They provide energy. They act as food reserves in the body. They are components of body structures, and then they can be used for commercial value. Well, students, that's great. Having looked at the functions of carbohydrates, what about if the carbohydrates in the body are not enough, or you do not have carbohydrates in your body? What would happen? I'm thinking you would develop some problem, right? Well, so we are going to look at the deficiency syndrome of carbohydrates. Lack of carbohydrates in our bodies leads to marasmus. Yes, the deficiency disease caused by lack of carbohydrates or inadequacy of carbohydrates in our bodies. The symptoms of marasmus include high appetite. It is very significant that if you don't have enough carbohydrates, you would want to eat so as to get it. So you have high appetite, then dehydration in the body. That is the lack of water in your body, simply because carbohydrates play a role in absorption of water. Then growth retardation. You will not grow as fast as required. And then we have wastage of muscles. There is loss of muscles, so somebody will lose weight. Yes. Then misery and shrunken appearance. The outlook of the person will not be pleasing. So those are the symptoms of marasmus: high appetite, dehydration of the body, growth retardation, wastage of muscles, misery, and shrunken appearance. So if you have somebody in your neighborhood that has some of those symptoms, you could advise them to eat more carbohydrates. Yes, advise them to eat more carbohydrates. Otherwise, I want to thank all the students out there for following my lessons. I want you to like my YouTube page and also share it with the other people so that we can share more educative material. Thank you very much. We shall continue from there. Stay home and stay safe.